Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us today. I am Matt Violette from the Michigan Recycling Coalition's Northern Region, and today we are coming together to talk a little bit about MRC business in whole and to talk about the topic of composting. Mr. Bill Hagsma is going to join us today as one of the board members, and he's going to talk a little bit through some slides. You can either do it from that mic there, Bill, or you can do it from one of these mics up here if you want to be looking out, your choice. But the big topic that we're going to talk about today is really food waste and food consumption in the United States. As a nation, we grow and raise 590 billion pounds of food each year. Depending on who you ask, we squander between a quarter and a half of all of that production. So you're 160 billion pounds of food waste that we squander in the U.S., depending on whose numbers you use. That's enough to fill the Rose Bowl, or the Rose Bowl stadium to the brim. On average, the estimates show us about 197 pounds per person of food waste in the U.S. So it's a big thing. It's one of the largest growing facets of diversion that we can do in the United States. There's dry waste, there's wet waste, and this is really the biggest component of wet waste. So we're going to talk a little bit about that today, but I'm going to let Bill kind of go through some MRC business first. I know part of that's going to be a little bit of discussion on Senate Bill 943, and we can have a little dialogue about that for those who want to. Otherwise, we can just kind of move along. So.
Okay, thank you, Matt. So on behalf of the MRC, I wanted to come and thank you for the opportunity to give this presentation. First of all, we want to talk about our regional outreach meetings, much like what we're having here today. We have 8 regions in the state of Michigan. And all the regions have been very busy putting together meetings, conducting meetings like we're experiencing today as well. We have one coming up in West Michigan on December 4th. East Michigan is scheduling one, I believe, for December 12th. And all that information can be found at the website for Michigan Recycling Coalition. As far as membership, we encourage everyone who's not a member to consider membership for the MRC. There's many benefits that you can receive from it. I know for me, the greatest benefit I receive is the networking I get out of the Michigan Recycling Coalition and the awareness of what's happening in the state as far as policy changes and upcoming opportunities for us to serve our clients in this arena. I want everyone to consider saving the date. We have our our annual conference coming up May 14th through the 16th. It'll be in Ann Arbor this year at the Sheridan. So if you have not attended a conference before, it is probably one of the best opportunities for you to see what the MRC is all about outside of these regional outreach meetings. And you'll meet a lot of people like yourselves that are in the business, both from a municipal perspective or a business perspective. It's a great networking opportunity. You'll meet some great exhibitors as well.
I'm going to want you to mute yourself, and I'll put you on, and I'll let you know when you're ready to talk about that.
The Recycle Michigan campaign that has been ongoing, that's kind of our logo, if you will, for the MRC. We have 32 partners right now, business, nonprofit, government, institutional partners. As you can see from the slide here, the Recycle Michigan logo is very nice and catchy. You get a sign if you're a business member. You can sign up for a different dollar amount that will offer you what size sign you want to maybe place at your office or on your building. Obviously, the Benzie bus, as we see here, is showing that logo with others on the side of the bus that they use up there. That's a great use for that. And also, we're kind of coming into the season of Christmas and gifts. What do we want to get our families and friends? Maybe you want to consider something from the MRC. Give the gift of recycling. We've got a lot of shirts and bags and things of that nature that you may want to consider offering as gifts to your friends and family in the industry. This slide, I believe, shows, we just wanted to share how much landfill waste that is perceived to be produced here in Michigan. It is estimated that between out of state and Canada, it's about a quarter of the waste that's generated in our landfills. Canada being the larger amount of that. 3%. It's a 3% increase over 2016. We have 605 cubic yards of waste disposed of in 17. It's enough to fill 94 MSU football stadiums, and it's to the equivalent of about 16.6 million tons. Now we know better as far as municipal solid waste composition. You'll see from the chart here that the majority of that is other 14%, 14.7 is other inorganics. There's food waste. It just kind of goes to show some of the composition of our MSW, and then the value of the commodities market. This actually kind of surprised me a little bit. Well, it didn't surprise me, but when I look at things and I think about recycling commodities, you think about paper and cardboard being kind of the majority of what we produce, right? But from a dollar perspective, we're showing on this graph, 74 million of it is plastic packaging, 2, 5s, and 7s. Whereas corrugated is 57 million, with mixed paper at 31. Obviously, if you take all the fiber markets, that fiber market is much greater than the plastic market as a whole, at least plastic 2, 5, and 7. So there's value to these recyclables, and we want to make sure that those valuables are getting to the end markets. And then we wanted to share a little bit about some of the area, some of our surrounding communities, states, where their recycling market, where their recycling rates are. Right now, Michigan is at about 15% recycling rate. We are the lowest by far of any of the surrounding Great Lakes states. Quite a bit lower than, let's say, Minnesota, which is at 43. Just a little bit lower than Indiana, which is 17. But our goal is to get that recycling rate up. And more than half of Michigan's recycling rate is direct result of state policies, shown here in the graph. Senate Bill 943 is a bill that proposes an increase in surcharge on landfill tip fees. It is deemed the first sustainable long-term funding mechanism for environmental issues, and the funding is directly supporting recycling, industry oversight, and the brownfield development. Changes to Part 115 would be broaden and support this updated planning process. Assure facilities can be cited if needed, provide oversight to facilities, enable locals to require service provision for residents, and establish recycling access standards. Preserving the right of local to limit landfill expansion, and grant to support program and infrastructure development. And then apparently, I believe there's now a House Bill 6483, as the House has adopted this as well. And the MRC board, wanted to put out why these proposals are right for Michigan from their perspective, and from others that deemed it to be as well. Not a producer responsibility effort. There's no material bans proposed. There's no expansion to the bottle deposit law. It updates the current policy framework to diversify and expand material management opportunities, and improves the process in which public and private partnerships can develop and to meet needs, removes the incentive to dispose, and it moves material out of households and businesses into processing centers in the market. I just want to say thank you on behalf of the board of the MRC to allow us to give this presentation from the MRC.
Bill, you want me to have that clicker as well, if you wouldn't mind? So it's a very nice update. Thank you very much, Bill. Before we kind of jump into the subject on hand, does anyone want to talk about Senate Bill 943 at all? Is there any conversations that need to be had? Any further exploration that you people in the audience want to hear on that? As Republic Services, like many other individuals in the country and in the state right now, we have our own opinions on this. We don't particularly support it. Republic, this is really an environmental bill to us. It's not a recycle bill, and we don't feel that the landfill industry should be the tax collector on this. But that's all I'm going to say on it, and there are other ways to look at it. You know, this is a step in a direction, and it can be looked at that, and we can continue moving forward. And so I'll leave it alone at that unless someone else has anything else they want to say about it.
I do, yeah. Emmett County, we're definitely in
Hold on,
support of
hold
Senate
on,
Bill
hold on.
943. We've
Yelling
talked to
over.
we've talked to our elected officials about supporting that bill. We believe it's the only thing we have to fund recycling. In terms of policy, we're totally devoid of policy that encourages diversion. There's no policy that funds recycling, so this is our best bet, and this is the only thing we have right now, and so that's why we're in support of it. We've also gotten a letter of support in terms of the funding of Senate Bill 943 from our Emmett County commissioners, just on the recycling portion of things.
All right, you started yelling at us there, Lindsay, because I didn't have you modulated yet. Thank you.
Oh. I've got a very loud, boisterous voice, so.
Yep,
yeah.
you do have a very loud voice. No one's ever told you that before, though. It's okay.
That is news to her.
So, ladies and gentlemen, Lindsay Walker is joining us. I'm going to run through the introductions real quick and just let you know who we've got in front of you today for those of you who don't know us and for those of you who are turning in through the online broadcast of this or seeing the recording of this somewhere in the future. Lindsay Walker from Emmett County is the Economic and Business Liaison for Emmett County. She's been with Emmett County since 2007. Really has a passion for the environment and passion for Michigan. She most recently became a council member on the Petoskey Chamber of Commerce. Go, you, way to go. The Petoskey Council, City Council. And she heads up a bunch of their programs, including their food waste composting program. And so she's going to talk to that. Andy Gale, to my left, to my far left, is part of the founder of Bay Area Recycling for Charities. Andy grew up in the greater Chicagoland area, but after traveling the world, finding the best place to live out of all of them, he chose West Michigan, or northern West Michigan, and has built a very strong company there with a mission on waste diversion and economic development through recycling. We'll talk a little bit in the future. If you don't know Andy's business has a lot of different arms. One of them is composting, one of them is zero waste. Andy is huge in the recycling market of mattresses in Michigan and is a big, strong component of e-waste as well. So Andy does a lot of different things for a lot of different people, but he's here today to talk to us about Bay Area Charities recycling compost arm of this today. And then Josh Stoltz from Grow Benzie. Grow Benzie is a nonprofit organization in Benzie County that has a facility with active gardens and active composting programs and has kind of a mission for that area. I'll let each of you, kind of take a second and introduce yourself as well, kind of pick up from where I left off, and we'll start with Andy and kind of work your way back to Lindsay.
Okay. So, first of all, thanks for everybody coming out here today and talking about composting and food waste. We started this organization called Bay Area Recycling for Charities about 10 years ago, and one of the first things that we started to do was food waste composting. And I remember the day we started it because we literally printed off of the internet some directions on how to build a 4-pallet bin, and then it said put leaves into it, and we put leaves into it, and then it said put food into it, so we put the food into it. It was like building a recipe. And then it said stir it with a hay fork, and we stirred it with a hay fork, and then the next day it started to heat up, and we were like thinking, how did this happen? Is there magic beans or something in there? Anyway, so we started to educate ourselves more and more in the realm of composting and got the MSU Master Composter, Master Gardener level. And then at that point, the DEQ started to provide some commercial composting lectures and seminars, and we started to really educate ourselves more and more about what was happening inside that compost, carbon, nitrogen system that we were building out there. And since then, we've grown our composting operation to about 2,000 pounds of food waste per day. We compost out at a farm. It's pretty rudimentary. Composting is very hard on equipment. It's very labor intensive, and we don't have the most up-to-date equipment. We operate with a Bobcat and turn our windrows that way. But it works, and we're looking for down the road here for grants and things that help us grow to the next level. And so in that process, I would say that composting to me is one of the most interesting parts of what Bay Area Recycling for Charities does, because it is such a needed service, and it needs an organization like ours to kind of go in there and figure out some of the pros and cons of how to operate it. So that's where we started, and just leave it at that for right now.
Yeah, just leave it at that. Kind of give a background.
Then Josh Stoltz.
Sure. So I grew up here in northern Michigan, and on my chore list was weed the garden, feed the chickens, take out the mulch, and burn the papers. So we always take the papers out and burn them in the burn barrel, and then the mulch was a mulch pile. It was just this pile behind this, behind the barn. And so I moved away. I grew up, went to Benzie Central, moved away. When I came back, I had this opportunity presented to work at this community center called Grow Benzie. I'm going to show you a quick video about where we've been in the last 10 years, but it was a great opportunity for me because now I get to connect within the community. It was a 4-acre commercial nursery, so it already had greenhouses. We've got a big incubator kitchen, and so we're always talking about ag and food, and obviously soil is a big part of that. So I'm just going to play this 5-minute video. It gives a snapshot. We kind of did a spoof on the TEDx. We call it Grow X Benzie. How's the internet in here?
Yep. Technology. Gotta love it. That first 33 seconds went really well.
Thank you, everyone. Welcome. In the lights of some great speakers before me, to Bob Russell, to Seth Bernard, I'd like to thank you for your time and this opportunity to share not my idea, but your idea. It's a big idea, and it's all of your ideas put together. Think of a sparkler. When you were a kid, you had your sparkler and your friend came over and you passed on your spark to your friend and they ran off into the night. The same idea with your idea I'm looking to get from you and connect with everyone else here and everyone out there listening. This idea that you have has to do with your community. I'd like for you to dream with me for a second, to build a community center with anything you want as part of that building. What would you have as part of that community center? Would you have a commercial kitchen for big events? Would you have a giant assembly room so you could offer classes or space for weddings or private parties? Would you have a farmer's market in the summertime to help farmers promote their foods, but maybe you could offer classes on how to cook in that kitchen, or maybe have classes on how to garden? Or maybe you'd have walking trails around the entire property with learning stations, benches, places for kids to hang out. Would you offer after-school programming for youth? Learn about maybe culinary skills or maybe wood shop skills? Maybe just to have a fun place to hang out with their friends. Would you have a maker space or a sewing studio? Places where you could come in, learn about some life skills that maybe you were interested in when you were growing up. Maybe your grandparents taught you about it, but you just never took the time to follow through. What if we had that space to offer? And what if I told you this space already exists? Now I have 2 actions to ask of you today. Number 1, you're already doing. You're still paying attention. And for everybody at home, you've already passed that limit that everyone says, oh, your attention limit is only 6 seconds. Well, you're well beyond that. You're engaged because you care about your community. Number 2, I'm asking for your support for Grow Benzie, our community center that's already done what I'm describing. That commercial kitchen, we have one. It's certified by the state so we can start value-added food businesses from scratch and help them get their food product to market. We have a farmer's market that supports local farmers, but also has classes such as gardening workshops, beekeeping classes, all sorts of farming activities to show people life skills, job skills. We have an incubator farmer. That farmer who graduated from MSU, she's now starting her own business under the infrastructure and the greenhouses that we have on our 4-acre campus. We have a food truck. That food truck sells and promotes local and healthful foods. One of our mission statements is to connect people to healthful foods, and our food truck does just that. We sell the food that we grow 100 feet away instead of 1,000 miles away. We offer prescription foods. We have a culinary program in the summertime during our farmers market that actually shows people how to cook their food that they buy at the farmers market, and then we give them a voucher to go purchase that food and then take it home to make for their family. That's just another program that we offer. It hasn't been our idea. This was one of your ideas. There's so many ideas out there about building community. Grow Benzie has just been able to gather that input, gather the momentum and ideas from the community, put them together, pass that spark to the next person, and show other people how to do it. So Grow Benzie, we need your support as a member. And what that membership does, it shows your support for a community center like Grow Benzie, but also the idea and concept of neighbors helping out one another. You believe that we can come together and offer these opportunities for our neighbors and for ourselves. You believe that by you participating, whether it's with $1 or $1,000 or volunteering or sharing it on social media, you believe in what Grow Benzie believes in. We connect people to healthful foods and jobs and life skills, and most importantly, each other. These are all ideas that people have had that you'd be supporting by becoming a member today. Please go to growbenzie.org, click on that membership button, donate $1, donate $1,000, get in the loop,
Donate
start learning about what
$1,000.
ideas
We're
are
open
coming
for
to
that.
fruition.
I'm open to that too.
You just F5 that. Awesome. Thank you.
And so, with so much related to farming and soil, we started, even before my time, I started 4 years ago, we started a community compost, and that was, our big back parking lot was a compost center that the local Benzie County Recycling would promote, and within a year that turned into the pile that people would just bring everything, including their Christmas lights, and I'm sure a lot of you know how that goes. So we shut that down for about 2 years. When I started, we had a conversation with Benzie County Recycling and Solid Waste and with the Benzie Conservation District. How can we get started with a community engagement with local compost? Because there are a lot of folks that don't have the space on their property. So we started another one hidden behind our other barn, and now we've engaged with, there's probably a couple dozen people that regularly compost their food scraps, and they participate by doing the turning, and every year we have a dirt party, a soil party, and folks come in, we trade seeds, we have a seed library now, and then folks get a bucket of that nutrient-rich soil.
Well,
There's some
thanks.
other things that we'll talk about too.
Thanks for painting that picture, Josh. And that video is phenomenal. I like the way that you did it. You have a video production background from what I remember reading
Yes,
on you as well.
yes.
So a hidden talent there that came in really handy. Matt Flechter likes to make really funky videos too, so you and him have something in common there. Hey, Lindsay, we're back to you. Why don't you fill in on that bio that I gave on you, tell a little bit more about yourself and your program without going into great detail here, just as a background. For those of you who don't know Lindsay Walker out of Emmett County, she's joining us via phone because the weather pattern is a little nasty up there today. And so we're improvising. So here we are.
So I've been with Emmett County Recycling since 2007. I handle recycling outreach, commercial accounts, and market development. So just kind of how we do things here at Emmett County. Lots of us, we wear different hats all the time. So just yesterday and on Monday, I'll be back in the gatehouse at our transfer station, recycling facility, and composting site in Harbor Springs. So as the needs arise, we kind of fill in different roles here and wear many different hats. So I've been active with our yard waste composting and development of our food waste reduction and food waste collection and composting program since I started basically in like 2008, 2009, I started taking over the reporting to the DEQ on an annual basis of our yard waste volumes. So I've been part of that development of the expansion of that program and kind of systematically looking at the solid waste stream in our community and on a national level and figuring out how we can kind of systematically go after that waste stream and going for both the highest volumes, and organics is a huge part of that. I think that on the national level and for ourselves into the next 10 to 20 hyper local evolution of sorts. And so we market most of our commodities right here in the state of Michigan, and I think that organics and composting and working with our different businesses and residents in our area will become more focused on the organics waste stream as being the largest portion of the municipal solid waste stream currently and moving forward. So we're really excited about the expansion into this realm, and we think that organics and composting and compostability of products, especially packaging and products, is really the wave of the future. So we're excited about doing pilot programs and leading our community in Michigan into that future.
Fantastic. Thank you for that, Lindsay. So in preparing for this meeting, and for those of you who are in the room with us, I put together a timeline, which is over there on the table, kind of walking through how we got to where we are today. And I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but there's a couple notable points in there that I kind of want to clue you into. If on the first page, there's an estimate on the 1900s, talks about what trash looked like in Manhattan, the Bronx, Brooklyn and the Bronx. And in that report, it said the average citizen produced 141 pounds of wet garbage. And when we started this conversation, we talked about how the average American today produces 197 pounds of food waste. So wet garbage back then is really called food waste today in comparables. And so it's interesting. The total pounds per person in the 1900s when this report was put out was 1,672 pounds. And if you kind of jump forward to when the EPA put out their last report in 2015, the generation per person in the U.S. was 4.48 pounds, which is 1,635 pounds per person. The big discrepancy between those two is in the 1900s, 1,443 pounds of that was coal or wood ash. And now that's consumable products. So it's an interesting item to look at as you look at the timeline of how we've gotten where we are in the last 118 years, that pounds per person is pretty close to where we were 118 years ago. It's just the mix is a little different. So I thought that was pretty interesting. And, for those of you who don't spend your time in this industry every day, really the recycling movement in the United States kicked off in the 70s. Landfill regulations kicked off in the 70s, early 60s and mid 70s. Things are, ever evolving. 1953 was the first TV dinner, right, folks? So it's not that long ago. The aluminum can for beverages was only produced 55 years ago. So we've only had pull-top aluminum cans for beverages for 55 years. And so it's interesting, but as you look at, compost, you go back into the 90s, the yard waste bans are what really started the conversation around compost. And so yard waste was, in that time frame, the conversation was really about landfill space. Yard waste bans came about because people were trying to extend the life of landfills by removing those organics, that large amount of materials. So, between 1990 and 1998, 20 states issued yard waste bans. And that's really kind of one of the catalysts here to removing those organics and getting that material. And so that's kind of a fun fact on compost going into the 90s. And food waste, traditional curbside food waste, as we think about it today and how we collect it, at the consumable level at the home, is still really a minority business. I mean, not a lot of people do it. Not a lot of states have those programs. Even in the most urban environments, we don't see a ton of that. So what we're doing in northern Michigan to try to make this a reality for our folks, and in Michigan in general, is a huge accomplishment because, when you look at California or you look out at New York and you look at the coast, you see these kind of activities. But when people think about the infrastructure that we have in northern Michigan and the density that we have in northern Michigan, it presents its own unique challenges. So I don't want to steal the show by any means, but I wanted to kind of talk through that. If anyone's listening to this out in Never Never Land or in the evergreen broadcast of this, and you want a copy of that timeline, you can email me and I'll be more than happy to get it. The MRC always has access to all the information that we present as well, so you can reach out to the MRC and get that. It starts in the 1700s when the settlers came, and it ends in the China sword where we're at today. So it's It's a nice 5-page timeline with a whole bunch of source documents to it, so it's kind of fun. But so I want to kind of jump right into where we are in the programs that we're doing. Because Lindsay's on the phone, I'm going to let her kind of go first, just in case if we lose battery life or cell signal, and have her talk a little bit about where her program is and what it's doing. And if we can get the slide deck to do what it needs to do, we can move that along. So Lindsay, why don't you go ahead?
Okay. So mine is a bit of a timeline overview as well. So obviously our kind of program really started with the yard waste ban in Michigan, and that happened in the late 90s, I believe. Is that right, Matt? Did you
Yep.
say that in your timeline?
Yep.
So in terms of policy, like what we have in the state of Michigan, in terms of policy that encourages diversion, basically we had a bottle bill from the 70s, and we have a yard waste ban from the late 90s. And those two pieces of policy are clearly not enough to create good policy and infrastructure to encourage diversion, especially of organics in Michigan, but it's what we got. So, so in 2005, we operate a waste transfer station. We also operate a materials recycling facility. We are a super drop-off site for our region, for all of Emmett County. We're located in Harbor Springs, and on the site of an old dump, an old township dump, which obviously, like Matt highlighted in his outline, those township and municipal dumps closed in the late 70s, and the private sector or the public sector kind of discontinued collecting waste for free from their residents, at the curbside, and we went to these strategic kind of transfer stations and larger land sales operated more by the private sector, and the private sector kind of took over in terms of collection. So with that in mind, we operated or opened up our first recycling center in the 1990s up here in the Emmett County area. And at that time, we just recycled basically two commodities, but the evolution has included in 2005 the creation of a bulky materials area where we have a yard waste tipping area. And so how it's been set up in Michigan with the yard waste ban is obviously municipalities, townships, and counties are kind of responsible for creating their own residential drop-off centers and managing that organic waste. With that in mind, we are that one area. We also get volumes of yard waste from our 2 or 3 township and municipal yard waste drop-off facilities, and then we bring that back to our facility for larger windrow composting. Starting in 2004, we started reporting to the state, the DEQ, on our windrow operations, our yard waste composting operations. Initial volumes, the first couple of years was anywhere between 1,000 and maybe 2,000 cubic yards, all leaf, pretty much all leaves, very carbon-heavy operation. We still are very carbon-heavy to this day. And carbon, I mean, the browns in the composting process. So up until 2014, we started to look at the ability to divert some of part of the solid waste stream, the majority being food waste. We were concerned about maybe, being able to divert some of that and make different compost product that would include both food waste from either residential or commercial sources, and combining that with our yard waste operations. So in 2014, we had Resource Recycling Systems do a case study for us to examine the possibility and the business case for either collecting food waste and yard waste residentially, collecting food waste just commercially, or perhaps going into a pilot program that would address both some residential food waste and commercial food waste combined. So after RRS did this study, they made a business case. We decided to go and start with the commercial sector because we felt it was the lowest hanging fruit. And we also were in a good position. We already provide curbside commercial recycling services per subscription for our commercial customers. And so we had a slew of really good restaurants that were doing a great job of diverting all of their cardboard, of recycling to a T in those operations. So we approached them and asked them if they would be interested in doing a 1-year pilot on collecting commercial food waste. and all of them jumped on board immediately. We did not charge a fee the first year. By the second year, we had established a fee based on our cost of operation. In 2015 or 2014, I should say, our Department of Public Works board gave us $50,000 to do this pilot. And so with that $50,000, we were able to pay RRS for the study. We were able to modify equipment for the collection of commercial food scraps. We were able to buy a fleet of Cascade 64-gallon commercial carts. And we piloted the first year, we piloted a spring through fall pilot program and collected approximately, I think it was about 50,000 pounds of food scraps commercially at that time. So that's what started off. We love pilot programs in Emmett County. It's a kind of a way for us to be able to experiment with something without making a commitment to our community that this will continue on into the future. So pilot programs, we've done a variety of those with different commodities, whether it be asphalt shingles in our community or plant plastic recycling or marina shrink wrap. We always start with pilots, and that kind of brings fruition to a different and a more established, program that's part of our regular programming.
Lindsay,
So by
can you talk
Sorry,
for a
go ahead.
minute on how you guys came up with the modification of your truck design?
Sure. We looked at what infrastructure we had, and we thought, okay, so how can we, invest in some kind of? We looked at Perkins. They have a variety of different tipping mechanisms, tippers for equipment, and so we just kind of figured it out. We were like, okay, so we can take one of our old 25-yard drop site bins, our big recycling bins that we have at our drop sites scattered throughout the county. And we had one of our local welders and machine shops that we work with all the time on our vehicles and our trucks and our fleet. We had them, weld it and put some additional seals on the truck and open up a certain compartment so that we could install a cane lift. So it was a very kind of like, Northern Michigan way of doing things. Like, okay, we have this, so we can use this for collection, and we'll modify it to meet these needs. And so we really just went about it in that very kind of like, okay, this is what we have, and this is what can be done to make this work for this pilot. And those costs between the carts and the cane lift and the modification to the trucks, that came out at about $25,000. So we had spent almost half of the allotted $50,000, but that was going to at least get us through to do this pilot program. And we're still using that infrastructure, so we've really milked it for all of its worth thus far. So that's how we did that. And there's more information on our trucks, and we've got lots of pictures of how that works and what those look like on our website. And I'd be happy to follow up with anybody if they're interested in learning more about that specifically. So by 2016, we had launched our commercial food waste collection program and established what the tipping fees were going to be, or excuse me, not the tipping fees, but the cost for the service. So we have fleets of 64-gallon Cascade carts. They've proven to not work very well in the sense that you cannot overload. Food waste is very heavy and dense, and your collection infrastructure must really reflect the weight and the density and the fact that, like, food scraps or flower scraps, because we have both florists and restaurants that are working with us, food waste is not homogeneous, and it really depends on the type of operation that they have to what kind of food waste they will be generating. So either customers are doing just pre-consumer, or they may be doing a combination of pre-consumer food scraps and post-consumer food waste and paper and compostable type ware. So really, depending on the customer, you really have to work one-on-one with the customer to make sure that they've got the educational materials that they have, they've got the proper collection infrastructure, and that they're operating and putting food waste in there that we do accept and aren't putting, contamination or overfilling the carts because they have the staff hasn't been properly educated. So very heavy influence on working with those businesses one-on-one, and you already have to be recycling to a T to be able to participate in our program. And so the amount of work it's taken to really work with those customers one-on-one to ensure that we're getting a clean product that we can use where that contamination for commercial food scrap programs was kind of, and on the composting end of things, was one of the biggest kind of challenges for people in similar situations to our situation, whether you're a service provider or you're the actual compost operator as well. And being all of those things, we were able to really hone in on the education, the right materials that they need for posting within their restaurants or their operations, and like we were able to follow it from the very beginning until the composting operations. Having to not deal with subcontractors in that way has been good for our organization and allows us to really control the tempo and the pace at which we grow the program.
Thank you.
So by 2017, we applied for a grant to our local Petoskey Harbor Springs Area Community Foundation to pilot a residential food waste reduction program and residential food waste collection via farmers markets and our drop-off center. So, and the reason we decided to go into residential was because we want to be able to make a case for eventual collection of residential food scraps and yard waste with some of our municipalities, but we realize that it's going to be a huge educational curve with our community for people and residents to understand how to reduce their food waste first and foremost, and then we figure out a way to collect food scraps or encourage families to explore the joys of backyard composting. So the residential program is multifaceted in that we are really looking to reduce food waste as well as on the commercial end of things. But for residents, because the majority of food waste that's found in the solid waste stream comes from residential sources, that really is where we need to focus our educational efforts and helping families reduce their food waste. We've already gotten them, to the point where in Emmett County, if you're recycling curbside or at our drop sites, about 75% of your residential waste is recyclable, and another 20% is compostable. So that leaves very little waste for Emmett County residents, and so that's an ideal scenario where we're educating them to reduce their food waste and reduce their waste in general. And the cost of garbage will continue to go up, and the best that we can do here within Emmett County to keep the rates of garbage high incentivizes people to reduce their waste and throw away less garbage and then divert those resources. So residential food waste, we set up booths at farmers markets. That was our initial way of starting that program. We provided people with a kitchen caddy, a little bucket, a 3-gallon bucket for collecting their food scraps, and that they were either going to enjoy the joys of backyard composting or use one of our residential drop sites located at the winter and summer farmers markets in Harbor Springs and Petoskey, and also at our drop site in Harbor Springs. So included in that caddy, the caddy is a tool or a mechanism for helping families think about food waste. It also comes with a variety of cards that tell folks how to shop smart, how to reduce their food waste by preserving fruits and vegetables and herbs in a way that will conserve them and preserve them, how to utilize food that might be on its way out, like bananas for smoothies and things like that. Just really thinking about food waste in a very practical kitchen kind of way. So that was the tool or the mechanism. We also have them sign a pledge. So Give All Food a Future is the residential program, and the pledge that they sign just says that my family and I are going to reduce our food waste in all of these different ways, and we're making a commitment to do it, and they sign the pledge and they give that back to us. We send out monthly newsletters about Give All Food a Future, and then the families also keep half of the slip themselves, which says what they've committed to in terms of reducing their food waste at home. So this program is very much a closed-loop program, and that we are working with the commercial sector. We're working with restaurants and flower shops. We're also working with the residents. And then the closed loop of this program is that we're producing a finished product, a compost product at our facility that then should go back. So kind of being really in close contact with the farm-to-table movement in our community, with the agricultural community, and making sure that we are amending our soils in Emmett County with really good used compost that's been generated here nature, very homegrown, very locally. And so closing that loop by understanding how we can build our soils in our community and use this in our gardens, and so kind of making all of those big connections for a closed loop program. So we sell a finished compost product. It's independently tested with MSU Soil Labs. We screen it every year. We contract with the local excavator. They come through with their screener. They screen the compost. We test the compost, and then we bag it for convenience, and we sell it by the bag, or we sell it in bulk and try to make connections with our local landscapers and farms to have them use and purchase our compost for their operations as well. So yeah, there's a lot of details within there, but that's basically how our program functions. And I see a future in the next 5 to 10 years where we are doing more organics diversion. We're working with our businesses and restaurants on what kind of products and packaging they should be using in their operations, and whether, compostable plastics, PLAs, are the best use for a takeout container, or should we be going for something that's recyclable first and maybe compostable later? So moving into that future with our community is definitely another challenge.
Great.
And yeah, we're just excited about the future of organics and diversion and its hyper local type of nature. So.
All right, thanks, Lindsay. So don't steal all the panel questions here.
Okay.
We'll circle back to you here on some of that stuff. So we're gonna, what we're taking away from what Lindsay just said there, or what I take away from it, and seeing that program firsthand is, Emmett County has developed some infrastructure based on, my words, not their words, Frankensteining some equipment together to satisfy the need initially, with the ability to show improvement for the future to justify capital investment from their county board when they need to go after it by growing this program kind of grassroots. And that's what we see in the compost market in a lot of different regions across the United States is, us improvising and doing what we can with the resources that are available. So they took a 20-yard roll-off container and put a cart tipper on the side of it, put some hydraulic controls on one of their roll-off trucks so they could run that tipper, and really modified some of their existing capital at the least amount of money they'd have to invest in it to build a working prototype program. They've done well with it. And we'll talk about some of the struggles along the way when we get into the questions. But so I want to go over to Josh next and just have us talk through a little bit. The video showed us where Grow Benzie has gotten to, but kind of talk through the history. I know you've got some big plans about additional kind of food waste collection coming up. You don't have an active outgoing collection program today, but you've done a lot of planning and thinking. So let's talk about what that Benzie County area looks like of northern Michigan.
First, Lindsay, thanks for that. That was pretty inspiring. You do a lot of stuff, and it's important that you're doing that work as a pioneer because you're pushing those boundaries and just kind of putting out the new ideas. So those of us that are behind you or in your wake have an easier way into, the government or private sector. And for us as a community center, we're a hub of information, but we can add leverage to our conversation in terms of marketing and education to the community. So that pushback that you feel, Lindsay, you're helping us. So something like, talking about a community center not having that large of an impact besides those individual relationships. So say with schools, we help our local schools, Benzie Central and Frankfort, come up with the resources to do compost within their schools. So 5 years ago, it was let's put a bucket out there and see how it works, and we have to find a volunteer to help, take that bucket off site. To now, and then of course you have the maintenance workers saying, well, that's too much work because that's an extra thing we have to do. Well, just a month ago, the Benzie Central maintenance crew is saying how great it is to have less garbage cans that they're taking care of, and now that compost goes out to the school compost pile. So us having pioneers ahead of the time helps us come in, and it just takes time and repeating some of these mechanisms. When it comes to compost and soil, we also know that this is something that people are interested in. Being in agriculture here in northern Michigan, people understand the importance of soil. And so our angle when it comes to education is pretty simple, because a lot of folks are already aware of the importance of composting and recycling. But for building soil, people really catch attention, to building soil because they know it's important for our food. When we started this whole compost initiative, partnering with the Benzie County Solid Waste and Recycling and Conservation District, there was conversations about how much this could grow, and that provided us an opportunity to talk about how much work it is. That's the same thing when people come to grow Benzie, say, hey, we need to have a raised bed at every Benzie bus site and at the jail and at the hospital, and I say, well, who's gonna weed the garden? Who's gonna water the garden? That's always the next question that we can't answer. So when it comes to compost or turning the compost, there's work. So again, us educating people and having short videos and having workshops and having our farmers market where we have thousands of people coming through is a way for us to educate. 2 years ago, we added an edible trail to our property and an edible mini golf course. And so we have a treasure map, so when people show up, either renting the facility or attending the farmers market, they can take this treasure map and walk around to all these learning stations, one being that mini golf course where there's a strawberry putt-putt hole, and then the lavender hole. We have bees, we have mushroom logs, and we have our compost area. And so when people go back and check out this compost area, they see how contamination is bad, they see what you should be doing at a compost pile. And then of course, if one of us are giving us the tour, we can bring their guard down and say, hey, as long as you're putting that waste in the pile, it's better than putting it in the in the trash or in the waste stream. So education and hands-on experiential learning is really important for Grow Benzie and for the schools and for how we interact. We do have some other ideas about how to include more restaurants, flower shops, businesses, but it comes back to work. And how can we keep that sustainable? How can we have a model that we can pay someone to make sure we can keep up with that? We work within the county, county boundaries in terms of how the recycling. We have a single stream for Benzie County. They have their own ideas on how they could do compost, but since we're educating everybody, we've got a couple ideas. I don't know if you wanted me to go into the curbside pickup. A few years ago, working with the after-school program, we recognized how important it was to have kids working with their hands. So we had a bike shop, and the bike shop was, we had one in Frankfort, we did one in Manistee, F-22 choppers we called it. The kids would come down and work on bikes, and we had bikes donated, and so the kids are able to wrench on bikes and drive away or ride away on their own bikes. Well, Carter's Compost was a program up in Traverse City with Ty Schmidt and his son Carter, where they were doing curbside pickup for compost. They were a guest presenter for our soil guild and our soil people a few years back, and the idea came up for us to connect the two. So in Benzie County, we have spread out villages. We have a city of Frankfort, we have Beulah Benzonia. 15 miles down the road, we have Honor, we have Thompsonville. They're spread out, but they're concentrated villages. And so the concept we've been discussing with Benzie County Solid Waste and Recycling is a curbside pickup for potentially recycling and for compost, where the kids have their centralized bike shop where they're working on bikes, and we have some income coming in from selling bikes and renting bikes within, say, the city of Frankfort limits. But we also have a pickup place and drop-off point for centralized compost, and the recycling bins are right next door. So we've already had one bike that was a conceptual bike for two kids to ride, pull a trailer. Just anecdotally around the community, how many people would throw $5 in to pay some kids to come around and pick up your compost or recycling? Everybody puts their hands up. So we feel like we haven't put enough effort into making sure it's a sustainable model, but we feel like community-minded folks say, yes, we want to employ a couple kids to do this, and we know that it's important to partner with the city of Frankfort and the city of or the village of Alberta, who are right next to each other. There's already spaces to do the community piles, and then of course maybe the backup, like Lindsay was saying, we bag it up and we sell it, to local farmers or to some of these gardeners or even volunteers that are helping participate. So that's something we're working with Norte right now in Traverse City. They're a bike centric health kind of recreation nonprofit, working with Ty again to build up a bike shop and bike community, and potentially bring that in as a sustainable revenue resource, so we can partner with private sector and nonprofits too.
So there's two things I want you to talk on a second, if you would. You had a compost pile that you guys paused for a couple of years, and it was paused for contamination. That was a drop-off site. It was an unmanned dropped-off site.
Right.
Can you talk about that contamination and why the pause?
Sure. So the motivation behind it was, across the county, let's have this space. The county recycling didn't have a space. We had the space, and we set up 3 bins with cinder blocks, and they were all 10 feet across, 10 feet back. And once the word got out, they filled up. And so it comes down to education and marketing, where we didn't have control of. This is before my time. We didn't have an executive director. This was all word of mouth. So our community center has built itself up. That first 6 years was all volunteer-based, board member, everybody that's involved. Well, the word of mouth can spread really quick. And within one season, it really just took a couple weeks, that yard waste showed up. People are showing up with the pickup trucks and shoveling it off, and we'd come in, we'd have a volunteer come in, and a week later they're overflowing with the contaminated pieces, and now we don't have a way to turn it. We don't have a place to turn it into. We couldn't take it from bin to bin, and now it's just a pile of leaves with a bunch of things that we probably don't want in it. And so we let that sit, turned it with some tractors, got it out of commission, turned it in the parking lot, made it disappear, and then we had a more controlled situation when we came back into the scene, through media releases and through the county recycling and through conservation district, making sure we had an on-point message about compost, what the goal of this was, who should participate. And even then, we still have people who show up with a couple bags of their leaves. But now we have staff on site, so there's still with the education piece, having somebody on site.
So you talked a little bit about a bike compost collection program, and that's a model we've seen across the country in a lot of different places. Austin, Texas rings a bell. Austin, Texas has a program called Compost Peddlers, and in Austin they did 650,000 pounds of compost in collection in the last year. So it's a tangible model that can exist, and it is cool. And it gives you that one-on-one connection with that youth, with the homeowner, and allows you to provide a little more education. So it's an awesome model. It's a great way to do it. But how would you manage that as a year-round program?
Year-round, winter would be tough. We don't even know. We haven't talked about how we could maintain it, at least education-wise, if we could get people to buy into a centralized pickup place, even if it's per street or maybe it's per, every 5 houses, if we have that many. Depends on the density of participation.
Okay.
We don't know that yet.
Okay. Awesome. Well, thank you for sharing that. Andy, why don't you tell us about Traverse City?
Okay, so we started, like I said, about 10 years ago, and from very crude beginnings of just the bins and composting with some leaves. And we received a grant from the Rotary Charities up there for $50,000, and that was our influx of capital that helped us get a wood chipper and a leaf vacuum and a dump truck, and all of it in different states of disrepair. Nothing new. We made $50,000 go a long way, and built up our initial systems, and then from there built our business around that. And so we do the recycling or the composting for Grand Traverse Resort, Great Wolf Lodge, Munson Hospital, and NMC, a number of restaurants in the downtown Traverse City area. We tinkered around with the residential, but because of the fact that we're running diesel trucks, you hit your efficiencies too fast or too slow, depending on how you look at it when you're trying to do residential. Unless you had like a neighborhood. We applied for several grants over the years after the Rotary Charities grant, and we've never actually been able to get the next level grant for us to move towards the residential and test different systems. So our system has been basically the same thing for about the past 6 years, 7 years. So we go around with a pickup truck and used to be just a two-wheel trailer, single axle, and then that quickly had to become a double axle 10,000-pound trailer because of the weight of what we pick up. And we diversified a little bit in the realm of special events. So our first special events that we had done in Traverse City, we spent a lot of time washing with a garden hose little souffle cups and plastic things that were in our compostable materials. And we quickly realized that there were companies out there like Eco products out there in Colorado, and we found some different compostable supply companies that were able to get us those PLA cups and compostable, coffee cups and plates, and we started to sell that material. And it went really well. I remember in 2012 I sold $12,000 worth of that material, and we hired a gentleman named Jordan Byron to come work for us, and based strictly off a commission, because I told him we couldn't pay him a salary until we had a business. But he took it from $12,000 in 2012 to $120,000 in 2013, and today he sells just north of $500,000 worth of compostable products. And we supply a lot of the restaurants and a lot of the local businesses with their plates and their cups and it just continues to grow and continues to expand. So we've always looked for the businesses inside there and looked for ways to educate through our guerrilla system of education, which is here we'll get you a bin and get you some literature on how to sort things inside there, and then you'll hear from us if it's not right. And so our customer base has done a pretty good job of keeping our contamination to a minimum. And we've purchased other things in the years going on, like screeners and bobcats and other pieces of equipment. But we've done almost all of that within the realm of the income stream. So it's just reinvestment. I think we've got a good price right now. We're at $5 per 35-gallon bin. I'm with Lindsay on what she was talking about earlier, and that is a 64-gallon container could weigh upwards of 200-300 pounds with wet food waste in it.
So fast.
Yeah, because there's certain places that will give you a very wet, soupy material. And so we started off with a 35-gallon bin, and I'm very glad that we did, because even a small, 1/3 the size of your normal 96-gallon that you have at home for recycling or your trash, that thing could get up over 100 pounds, and it's hard to maneuver. So, and all those bins and bags go into our trailer, and then they get transported out to our compost site, and that's where we're looking at investing now. We've gotten a grant for a bin tipper, and the one that we wanted to get wouldn't fit on the truck that we wanted or the trailer that we wanted to put it on. So we're still in the process of trying to figure out how to get that next level of what she called a candy cane. If you remember seeing the truck, on the other side of the truck is basically a couple of rails that go up that you can connect a 35 or a 64-gallon container to, and it would take it up and dump it into the back of in their case, their modified birdhouse or modified dumpster that they have. So lots of things to do. Also, just like Josh and Lindsay, I feel like we're pioneering these things. It's a lot of effort and energy, always work to be done out at the compost site. It's still an exciting part of what we do. We're very proud of what we've created, but it's always good to glean information and understand the education points and to really make those connections with the food stream. And composting, albeit it's a great way of recycling food waste, but there's other things that are better. So the old adage of reduce, reuse, recycle. I mean, that's reduce is what Lindsay was saying about getting people to make a commitment to take into consideration their food waste stream a little bit better. Reduce and then reuse. So reuse for us is a great use of food waste. I mean, there's animal stock feeds that you can create out there. I'm sure, a lot of the food waste from the breweries up in Traverse City make their way to farms where they can feed cattle or pigs, chickens. There's lots of different ways to divert that material from the landfill. So Matt, I got a question for you. So you're with Republic, and I'm sure somewhere in the realm, Republic does some composting
We do.
in the U.S. Tell us a little bit about what it is from the perspective of a larger waste hauler.
Right. So, I'm not super familiar with all of our composting programs in the U.S. From the research that I've done and the programs that I'm aware of, food waste for Republic really looks at commercial food waste. Residential food waste is very, very challenging. Where we do it, it's typically tied into a warmer climate, and it's tied into a yard waste program as a combination effect. It's not very common to see food waste as a standalone, but it's becoming more and more common. And it presents unique challenges. Our trucks have to be modified to be able to be sealed tight, to not have leakage. I mean, that's one of the large concerns with the wet food waste is really the drippage out of a truck. When you're doing a residential program, that's more of a concern than a commercial program. If you're leaving a trail of liquid through every residential neighborhood you go through, that creates a definite nuisance and a problem that people will talk about quickly. So we look at, really half of all the food waste is coming out of the non-consumable markets, coming out of the grocery and the food preparation market and the agricultural market. And how do we divert that material first and foremost? If you look to lettuce production in the United States, and I don't know how many people are familiar with lettuce production, but in lettuce production, that's done at the field, and really about half of the lettuce that's produced is actually harvested, because the farmers are determining by feel if that's a good head of lettuce or a bad head of lettuce. And so that material that's not harvested, that all of that effort went into growing, is tilled back into that soil, or it's mass harvested and either landfilled or done a different way. And then, lettuce is a great example of packaging in the U.S. So 80% of all the lettuce in the United States gets wrapped before it's delivered to the grocery store. And so that packaging, because it's packaged that way, that byproduct a lot of times ends up in the landfill, because the grocery market doesn't want to unwrap that product if it spoils or if a truckload goes bad. So that material ends up that way. So we as Republic see a lot of that challenge around large scale production and really commercial industrial food waste.
So do you think that's a good use of compostable plastics as this technology?
It is,
start
absolutely.
to expand.
Yep.
That these things one of their first original uses on the industrial market might be packaging this stuff in something
Correct.
that's made out of plants,
Right.
besides petroleum.
Yep. And so, we see, a trend in the U.S. as you look towards Walmarts and Meijers and large grocery chains at the ugly fruit trend that's going on right now, which is phenomenal, that we're starting to promote what was once an undesirable product just because of a blemish as something that was, not just thrown away, that's either sent to, a grocery store or, done as a second life through a food bank. So, I on a Republic side, I think there's a lot of challenges to doing home-based collection of food waste. There's less challenges when you're talking about large-scale food waste. And, the home food waste for us, just like trash, is really a density-driven business. You need to have customers that are willing to do it. It has to be tied to a municipal contract. It has to have more of an all participation equivalent driven by the municipality. There's a lot of education dollars that goes behind food waste and composting at the home. And then you have a large amount of contamination that you have to deal with as well. So you have to make sure that your processor is dealing with that well. And, I had a conversation with Chris Jolly at MSU a while back, and they were bringing a lot of their food waste to the digester until the digester started having problems with the pumps because of the materials that were coming out of the facilities had plastics in them or other materials that were jamming up their pumps. And so, there's traditional windrows, there's biodigesters, there's different avenues of composting this product. There's feed, animal feed, as you said. And so it's really finding that best, solution. Not only does Republic own and operate 100 plus recycling facilities and 140 landfills, but we own and operate, every one of those landfills has an on-site composting operation that's tied to it. that most of that material is used on site. It doesn't get marketed off site. And so some of our limitations on contaminants are a little bit different. But we're continuing to grow that business, and it's difficult to push it forward without the large businesses putting emphasis on that. And I think that we're getting there today more than we've ever been before in history on seeing large-scale businesses showing environmental concern and wanting to have that go to the right place.
Yeah.
So I know it's a roundabout way of answering that question.
No, but you mentioned landfills. I mean, everyone here already probably knows the statistics of it, but methane is 25 times worse than carbon dioxide as a greenhouse gas, and the landfills produce that methane, right? And yes, they try to capture those things. And going back to the yard waste ban that they had, I mean, that kept a lot of methane out of our atmosphere, because
Absolutely.
right now I don't remember what it is, maybe 45 or 50% of what we landfill is organic material. So some of it's food waste, some of it's paper. It's going to come in construction lumber or whatever it is that's inside there is producing these greenhouse gases and slowing us down from progress of cleaning up our situation with that. So I find it interesting that there's lots of little startups and shoestring and grassroots organizations, and I'm excited to see what the larger waste haulers will do down the road when it comes to these bigger businesses, which you're going to frankly have most of those contracts with larger waste haulers are going to take care of those larger businesses. That innovation happens at that level too.
And there's a tremendous amount of third-party composting operations that national and regional waste haulers use. I mean, we don't always use our own traditional composting facilities, and I'll give an example out of West Michigan. There's Cocoa Compost out of West Michigan, which is a 3-year-old upstart who's really looking at that large-scale production waste material. He doesn't want home material. He wants, Walmart's material. And he's pushing all of his byproduct directly back to farm. That's where all of that finished material goes to. It's not going back to, coat the side of a hill or do roadway projects. It's going right back into agriculture. Mm-hmm. And that's really about his process.
And who's that again?
That's Cocoa Compost out of Holland.
Out of Holland, okay.
Yep. And what's his name?
Spurt?
Brent, yeah.
Brent.
And
is that a spinoff of Spurt Industries?
No, it's not. No, he actually, and the challenge with that is, and I think the challenge with compost, and we've got Matt and Brian here from the DEQ, and they can probably talk to this better than I can. Just like trying to site a landfill, it's hard to site a compost facility. You get a lot of that "not in my backyard," that NIMBY response. And Brent went through 15 different tries to site that facility before he finally found a home where he could do what he wanted to do and prove his concept.
Right.
And it was a lot of pushback from municipal government, people coming to township or city government meetings saying, "Don't do this in my backyard. I don't want this facility
We're on number
here. It's going
7
to
right
smell."
now.
Right. Yeah. And so it's a
There's some
challenge.
catching up to do.
Depending on what you're doing and finding that available space and doing all of those things. So,
And there was really good information. I remember when I first started this, I talked to Spurt Industries, and Tom, was it?
mhm.
He wouldn't let me come out and see any of his compost sites, but he said just because he worked so hard to develop this technology himself, he didn't want to give that away. But he said, "I'll give you some advice, Andy." He said, "Don't worry about the food waste. Worry about the carbon. It's all about the carbon, because the
Right.
carbon is what controls the odor."
Absolutely.
And provides you the ability to grow. I mean, we've stopped growing our composting operation 4 years ago. We'll lose a customer, we'll pick up a new customer, but we've stopped marketing out there trying to figure out who's our next customer, because we're just in the place right now where we're trying to figure out how can we get our efficiencies up to the right level. I mean, we make good money at it, but a dollar saved is a dollar earned, so we need to figure out those efficiencies and transport. And so,
And I think another interesting trend as you talk about the carbons is, at one point in life and still today, there's a lot of municipalities that have their own leaf composting area. And the DEQ is starting to hone in a little bit on that here in Michigan because they passed new wastewater regulations 3 years ago, was that now? 3 years ago, where you're really talking about the compost tea runoff. And, you know, before, unless you killed off a bed of fish, you know, no one really paid attention to you. But now they're starting to regulate that a little bit more. And some of that Part 115 change is going to tie into that as well as we look at, you know, how we model things here in the state. But those kind of regulations help bring the industry to a higher standard and really help take away some of those smaller players that probably aren't doing the right things, but will be able to provide that carbon to people like you and Lindsay and Brent and Josh to help deal with that product. Because without that leaf, without that grass, you know, without those carbons and nitrogens, you know, compost really is a mix. It's a formula. And if you don't do it right, it's not good. And you don't heat it up right, it's not good. And you don't turn it right, it's not good. So there's lots of challenges to it. So before we go off on a tangent on that, let's kind of tie back into some of the questions. So one of the questions that we have as it relates to Northern Michigan, and I don't know if any of you have the answer or put a ton of thought into it, but how do we, once we put all the effort into educating residents to do this, how do we make a 12-month program available in Northern Michigan?
So who are you asking?
I'm going to start with you, Andy.
All right. Lindsay, you want to take this one?
Sure, we have a 12-month program. We operate year-round for commercial food scrap collection. So how do you do that? Well, first of all, I guess I kind of wanted to go back a little bit because hearing like the republics of the world and their interest in the commercial sector and the industrial and like on the production end of things, you would think that because of the scale at which food is produced in this country and in the industrial production of food products and in the transportation and in the grocery sales and commercial sales, you would think that that would be the biggest bulk of food waste in the municipal waste stream, and it's not. It really does come back to the residential, and residential far outweighs the amount of food that we waste in our homes is far outweighs all the industrial, commercial, transportation, and grocery store sales of food and the waste that's produced in those operations. So for us, it was like we knew that the commercial sector would be easier because they're poised and ready for reducing their food waste because it's dollars out the door that they feel every day. So they were really ready. It's like the residential end of things where we really need to educate and reduce, and that becomes a very hyper-local, how you reduce food waste at home becomes a very hyper-local personal thing for each individual family. So that is a sector that nobody really wants to deal with because it's messy, because it's complicated, and it's very, very driven by education. So in this context, it really is good that a county or a government is in charge of like the education piece. I mean, you could go as well with that whole, you could go as well with nonprofits as well, being the person that's going to educate each individual homeowner one by one. So it's a very laborious and very heavy on the educational end of things. It's not like providing a service all day long and we just collect your food scraps and it's a clean product and it's homogeneous and it's like easy, because residential is super difficult. And of course, nobody wants to go there unless you really want to go there because you realize that that is the bulk of the municipal solid waste stream. So that being said, how do you provide year-round food scrap service? And we do so by, in the summertime, we have a spray wash device on our truck, on our food scrap collection truck. So we rinse out the 64-gallon carts. In the winter, and we started with the winter pilot in 2016, we use compostable liners because to avoid the inevitable foodsicle, which is a frozen food mass inside of a commercial food scrap cart. So we switch our service to using compostable liners in the wintertime. And now we offer our customers the option of compostable liners year-round because a lot of folks like it. It helps to keep the carts cleaner. Doesn't require, because, you know, yuck and smell will kill a program faster than anything. So on the commercial collection end of things, liners help us deal with the yuck factor and keep things a little bit cleaner. On the production end of things, in terms of making a compost product, you know, we don't have a lot of smells and yuck factor at our facility because we are so carbon heavy. So most, when you're talking about 85 to 90% carbon in your operation versus 10% nitrogen, we really don't have a problem with funk or smell or stink because we are such a carbon heavy operation, and we will continue to be. Inevitably, we always are looking for new carbon sources and being able to bring more leaves and material to our site. So that's never been a problem for us, and obviously we're sited on a transfer station, old dump, old township dump area. So we're very much sited accordingly. We don't have a lot of residential neighbors, and what neighbors we do have, we just try to be good neighbors to them by having certain hours, and we only turn our windrows at certain times and times of the year. So managing the site is also very important. And, there's been some education because in the summertime, we really will have stink and smell. I mean, food scraps in a 90-degree, day inside of a brown food scrap cart, flies and maggots are a reality. And so for restaurants and businesses, that's been a huge concern for them because, of course, they want to keep everything clean, super clean and sanitary. They're, the health department's all up in their operations. And so providing food scrap collection services in the summertime has been more of a challenge than necessarily winter operations. Obviously, our windrows are at certain temperatures, even year-round, and in the wintertime, the temperatures on the inside remain 90 to 100 degrees. We do turn the windrows in the wintertime. They release a lot of steam, and so our operations are very active, and it's all about the management. We're pretty low budget at the facility as well. We have one loader, and we share that between our three operations, whether it's transfer station and recycling and compost. So how we provide those services year-round is really important. And for residential, on the residential food scrap and food waste reduction end of things, homeowners can continue to compost in the wintertime. That's also an option. Keeping it hyper-local is very important, and we encourage our residents to backyard compost as opposed to using a municipal drop-off site or whatnot, but not everybody has that option of backyard composting. So continuing on the education end of things and letting homeowners know that they have the option of continuing their food waste diversion even in the wintertime with backyard composting or with our commercial drop-offs as well. So there's been some challenges to year-round collection, but I feel like that's just part of living in northern Michigan, and we just have to kind of figure it out as we go along.
Yeah, I agree. When it comes to trying to do residential, we attempted it a couple different times, and for us, like I said, pickup trucks and diesel fuel and man hours of labor, it would work in a town like Cadillac here. I mean, you've got enough population density and homes close enough together, but I think the process for residential, it starts on your kitchen counter, right? So we all probably compost at home. We have that nice little stainless steel or plastic tub underneath the sink or something. I don't put it underneath the sink because I'll forget about it, and inevitably something will start to really go south. For me, it starts off in that little 1-gallon container on the counter. It goes into a 5-gallon bucket out in my garage with one of those snap-on seat lids on it. And then from there, when that thing gets 2 or 3 gallons or 5 gallons or 7 gallons in a 5-gallon bucket, it goes out to my compost at my farm outside. But if we were to have something picked up, I think that, a 35 to 64 gallon bin on a block by block basis, or maybe, 2 or 3 of them on a block where there's a little bit of, it's not super convenient, but unless it's going to be kids doing it, or someone on a bike who doesn't mind going and hunting to find out where, this family put their bucket, they hide their bucket over here, and these guys hide their bucket over here, and then you go down 2 streets and someone calls, oh, you missed my bucket, I had another bucket in my garage. You can't play it that way. You have to start to develop it into the direction that a larger waste hauler could basically take over for that. And I don't know how often they pick up, you see pictures of the bins out in San Francisco, you got the green and the blue and the brown bin. And so the food waste goes into its bin, and it's like a 35-gallon bin. The family doesn't produce that much. They produce enough to make it dirty on the inside, on the bottom of it. So I think to have something that's sustainable, population density, someone to help manage those people and educate, a person that can go door to door and really show them, because it would be a total catastrophe when it comes to the contamination on the residential side. It's hard enough on the business side to get people to do it. I mean, you saw that yourself. And were you just taking, Josh, were you just taking yard waste at that time and having landscapers drop it off and homeowners and people like that, or were you putting food waste in that original when you shut the
Food
pile
waste
off?
too, yeah.
Food waste. So what kind of contamination did you have in there? Were people putting in their plastic and glass and metal?
Yep.
Yep.
So the contamination mainly came from the yard waste, because that's the pile, the bottom of that pile. The leaves are on top, but the rest of that stuff on bottom, gravel, that all went into the truck, and then that came off the back of the truck.
Yeah.
And we'd have food waste, and people would show up thinking they're being part of the solution. So you'd see the nice colors on this side, but then you see, like I said, the Christmas lights over on this side.
Yeah. Yeah, Christmas lights. I didn't know they were not compostable. I thought they were compostable Christmas lights. So, yeah, I mean it's a challenge. And so on the residential side, I mean there's a lot of forethought, the right equipment, and making it a little bit less convenient for the homeowner to do it. So they're gonna have to walk down into their alleyway, 2 doors down, and dump it into a community bin, kind of, to make it worthwhile for someone on, in a garbage truck, or even someone like Bark or Emmett County to go down there and search out that bin and lift it and tip it.
So are you doing year-round collection now, Andy?
Yep, we do. Yep, we don't pause at all. We've never stopped. I get it. We've thought about it many a times to stop our
Right.
system and start over, but we don't want to lose that continuity. We don't want to lose that momentum that we have.
So in both your and Lindsay's experience, where's the financial tipping point where you become sustainable in terms of a number of customers that you need to get in order to make something run? And we'll stay with you for a second, Andy.
So yeah, we have, let's say, 50 customers, and they get picked up 3 days a week, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, throughout the summer. Come fall and through winter, their volumes are going to go down a little bit because we're a little bit more of a touristy area, but that material will also hold its
Integrity.
its integrity for a while. I've got documented proof that you can leave food out for 1 day and you'll have maggots on it the next day. It's amazing how fast those guys go. And so you have to pick up Monday, Wednesday, Friday, because you got to be there otherwise it'll go south on you really fast. And then we do these pickups. We charge $5 a bin. We're looking at raising those prices up to $7.50 a bin, just to increase the amount of capital money coming at us. So we might lose some customers over it.
And you're doing just Greater Traverse?
Yeah, we're just doing Traverse City.
Traverse City proper.
Proper.
Okay.
Grand Traverse Resort would be the furthest that we go up along that way. North Long Lake Road, I think we do the Children's House. We do a couple of small schools.
Okay.
But we get phone calls all the time, and people want us to expand, and it's difficult to turn them away because you caught them at a place where they're very motivated to do it, and you just can't afford to take on that kind of risk because of hitting your maximum capacities.
And so, Lindsay, you're doing just Petoskey, right?
Petoskey and Harbor Springs.
And Harbor Springs. Okay. And so, what does sustainable look like in your program?
Sustainable in our program looks like our community, both commercial sector and residential, and our homeowners understanding why we are trying to reduce food waste, what's the kind of ultimate goal of that, and also
let me pause you there
understanding
for a second.
and in a closed loop program, like understanding the value of compost and understanding how we can be composting at home and
Lindsay,
also
let me
on a
pause you for 1 second. What does sustainable look like in number of customers in order for you to provide the service? What does that look like in Emmett County's model? How many customers do you need to have in order to be able to continue to do this?
I would say probably 40 commercial, and then going with the first municipality with the early adapters to sign on to a pilot program. So it's not so much about how many customers we have as about having, like, educating speculation on the why and the how.
But on the collection side of it, there's logistics that are involved here, and in order to run a truck down the road, you have to have X number of customers, and that's why, in using Josh's terms, you look at all the different villages in Benzie, it's very hard to say I'm going to do a Frankfurt collection, but then I'm going to run 15 minutes up the road to Honor to pick up 5 other homes. It's not feasible to do those kind of stretches, and that's why both you and Andy are, demographically, very specific on where you're picking up. So if you only had 10 customers to do this in Petoskey Harbor Springs, it wouldn't be feasible, right? So what does that?
Be feasible, but also you have to understand that our operations for our food scrap collection program and our composting operations don't stand alone on their own
Correct.
right now. So they're subsidized by other parts of our operations. We would have to do a super deep dive and figure out if we were to portion that portion out of the system. Then at that juncture, we'd be able to answer. Oh, we need 85 customers twice a week at this rate, make it all cost effective or sustainable for the future. And we just we haven't done that kind of analysis.
Okay, awesome answer. Josh, so you've looked at Frankfurt and looked at a model around collecting in Frankfurt. And what did a customer base look like in order to be sustainable in that model that you drew up, envisioned?
Well, it depends. There's a couple factors that really will be the final system, decide on the final system. So where we house the actual shop at, how much that's going to cost us for a rent or gifted space, supervision. The way we look at it, we can have an adult supervisor that helps kind of maintain the program, but that doesn't have to mean that they go door to door. So our model typically looked at having 2 kids on staff looking per hour, and the final, whatever we plug in as the numbers as to number of houses that buy in will be what we can pay them at a minimum wage.
Right.
So we're just looking streetwise. We have 10 streets. If we can pick up 2 per street, we pick those up once a week, making sure we can cover minimum wage. We figure at the beginning we're going to have to complement that position as the administrator or that supervisor with one of our other programs, whether it be in education or in the farming world.
So I guess the reason I asked that question, and we see a lot of challenge around this, there's economics of scale. And you need to be able to build durable and sustainable programs that can live on. I mean, we can all develop pilot programs and do fun things with grant money, but that only holds us for so long. We got to, at the end of that period, be able to have something that moves forward. And what does that look like? And I think that's part of the conversation that sometimes we miss out when we talk about curbside collection. So let's talk a little bit about contamination here a minute. Contamination is, definitely a challenge. And we talked about your world, Josh, with the drop-off. You said, we get the gravel out of the bottom of the truck, we get the dirt, we probably get the flower pots. I mean, we're getting it all whenever we don't have a supervisor there to kind of monitor that. What has Grow Benzie done specifically to stop contamination beyond education? So what action items have you done besides, education?
That's about it.
Okay.
Signage, and then staff. So as we have more people helping out on site,
So people is your answer. Putting
Yeah.
people out at the drop site and
that's it. It's just people power,
okay.
and then education will come through the people.
Right.
Because it's not so much of a policing as it is a education. Here's why, or here's what we're doing.
And Andy, so when you're collecting at Great Wolf Lodge and Grand Traverse Resort and those type of events, and you're finding contamination, we use Grand Traverse. Grand Traverse has 6 kitchens on property?
Yeah.
How do you track that back to where that came from? Or are you collecting at each kitchen outpost?
We're collecting at each kitchen outpost, and you can
Okay.
track it back by just looking at what the contamination is, or whatever the material is. If is it plate scrapings, or that has the little crackers, because the crackers came from the banquet hall.
Right.
The little single serving
Yep.
to-go containers of the creamers and things like that. So we spent a lot of time trying to like isolate all the things you shouldn't contaminate your compost with. So we would make these pictures, hang them over the bins, like no single serving, to go, no ketchup little packet, and no these, and no this, and no that. And then it came down to compost is everything but plastic, glass, and metal. So it's food waste, and it's not plastic, glass, and metal. Plastic, glass, and metal is recycling. And it's right next to it. So we've just modified it to be really simple. There's plastic, glass, and metal recycling, and then compost, and it has no plastic, glass, and metal. But then that gets a little bit tricky because now you start to introduce these new technologies of material that you're going to start to want to them to use, compostable plastics. So what plastic can you not put into it? Now you got a PLA cup inside there, and one person might say, "Oh, you're not supposed to have plastic in there," and another person will say, "Well, it's not really plastic." So there's a change happening in the realm for that, And paper, you can have some papers in there, like napkins are fine, even the waxy paper from a butter packet is fine inside there, but then you'll start to get all sorts of paper contamination. The contamination we usually see is it's all beautiful food waste, and then somebody threw in all of those Sterno cans. And because someone was being lazy, and just to them that was a garbage, or maybe they didn't know, or maybe they didn't care, but it'll be food waste and Sterno cans. Okay. So to answer your question, I think the future of it is going to be the food waste comes back to a central location. Tell me if this sounds like something we're doing already with recycling. It comes back to a central location, and it goes over a conveyor belt and gets cleaned out. I don't think you're going to be able to fix the contamination problem. You can't fix it on the recycling side. People are going to put in whatever they want, whether they do it maliciously, with or without intent, because they're not educated, because it's a 4-year-old kid who's gotten his hands into the composting or recycling bin, and he's doing his thing. So I don't think you're going to fix the contamination problem. I think you have to be the one that's going to take that contamination essentially out of it. And yes, you can educate people to make it as clean of a stream as possible, but
With time, so that was true with us composting at the schools.
Right.
If we had one person there for the week showing them, then there was a decline in, in contamination. But it took that person, and then that was that impact that year, and then the new class comes in, and so you have to keep that going.
And like you said, in automation, in larger curbside programs, you have systems that are run across magnets, and you have systems that are run across screens that are, trying to separate some of those materials out to take that contamination out, because it's always there. And, it's hard for the transportation guy, when you build a route that's large enough to do that, for him to be the cop.
yeah.
And, we say that a lot in our industry is, you're here to educate as a driver, but at the end of the day, you're not the cop. That comes back to the municipality, that comes back to the, the operations supervisors. When you're finding contamination issues, you pass those back, and we spend a lot of time on that. Lindsay, how are you guys fixing the contamination issue?
I think the scale for us is really important. We only work with, 35 businesses at the height of our season. So having that small scale helps us educate those consumers accordingly, those customers. Our driver has to physically look inside. It's not like we have a front loader that we're tipping all the materials like a dumpster size or cart size into the back of the truck. So the driver's actively getting out of the truck, looking in the carts, tipping the carts, rinsing out the carts. So there's that level and scale of intensive, almost like a one-on-one relationship. If the driver sees anything, any kind of contamination, he records how much material is in every cart. If there's any problem with the customer, I have the ability to follow up with that customer immediately, live time, to let them know that there was contamination in their carts. And then we go back again to education. On the residential end of things, one of the big that we have in terms of policy here in Emmett County is we are a pay-as-you-throw system. And until you can really make a case, food scrap collection and composting is always going to be ridiculously expensive compared to waste hauling and landfilling and even recycling. So in terms of the scale of things, it's so expensive, and so we can only afford to have it scaled at such a rate where we can really, really control the feedstock of materials. So it's about scale for us, and it's about, creating ideally more policies that can incentivize food waste diversion or diversion of food waste from landfills. So we're up against a variety of challenges. Contamination is not our biggest challenge right now.
So let me ask you this question, Lindsay. We'll stay with you for a minute. How do we get the finished material distributed out in a cost-effective mechanism? How do we develop the markets to get that material once we go through the process of collecting it and creating it back as a soil amendment? In your opinion, where do we develop those markets?
I think on the state level, there's a lot of possibilities. I believe, I kind of go back to MDOT a lot in conversations about recycling and end markets, because that's the ability where we have the scale of projects that we really need to be able to move out the amount of material that we're producing. So I see hope in maybe working more with like our local road commissions and MDOT on projects where they're needing a finished compost product for reseeding and for projects where they've done road construction work and then the compost is on the side of the roads, growing grass or native plants or whatever that situation may be. So that would really privy us to be a lot more savvy on the marketing end of things with producing a really good compost product that these larger scale projects can actually use.
Josh, what do you say about that?
20 years ago, I found myself in Humboldt County helping a friend grow marijuana. There's a lot of soil that's used out on the West Coast for that. I came back here to Michigan. There's a lot of people that buy soil. There's a huge market for soil in general. And now that we're talking about local and how localized, hyper-local products I can have, soil is big. So I like what Lindsay's talking about, working with municipalities, but I think the coordination with private sector too, understanding there's a value for what is being created and understanding that there is an outlet for that. I think it's just a matter of transparency between entities, between government, nonprofit, and private sector, and then understanding the huge demand.
Yeah. So when it comes to getting all of your products out there, if you produce a clean, continuous product from year to year, and it's homogeneous and it's got all of the right things in it, I don't think you'd have any trouble finding those markets. Like Josh was saying, there's farms here that are buying compost from the Bay City area and driving it up. So there's compost that's coming into our region right here from
West Coast.
Yeah, from all around.
Right.
So as far as it goes, I think that you make a good product and you're going to sell it. But you have to be able to move it in bulk, I think. I think if you've got a bagging system, that's great. If you can develop your bagging market, but I think at the end of the day, you've got to have some sort of a system to deliver it out to those customers. And you can do it in a way where you're having customers come to you, but then you take the liability of overloading their back of their truck or something to that. So you find a lot of places, a lot of municipalities will not load your truck or your trailer because they don't want the liability of buying it from you. So they, at the end of the day, I think you wind up having to have that equipment to deliver that material.
Okay, fair enough. So, as we kind of wrap up here towards the end, the question that comes to my mind is, what's the next step in making Michigan a better food waste partner to the planet? And I know that's a big question, and I know you can go in a lot of different ways with it. So I'm going to start with you, Josh, on that one. How do we make Michigan a better place in terms of food waste towards our planet?
For us, in terms of education, the reduce, reuse component that Andy was talking about is huge. So if we look at how we make food in the kitchen, and so now as everybody's talking about making food, or the food movement, local food movement, we're talking about how we're making our food and then the waste that comes from that. So making your own chicken stock, making your own vegetable stock, how you're making your food, all of that, the education about making food, the direct correlation is what is left over from that. So from my world, when it comes to kitchen, culinary nutrition, we're talking about food in general, local vegetables and fruit. We can talk about the waste from that. So that's our approach would be the direct application of residential reuse and reduce food waste.
Andy?
It's an interesting thing to look to see where we're going down in the future. I mean, there's the short term, what's going to happen in the next 5 years. I think, continuing to find that grant money to help organizations like Emmett and Grow Benzing and Bark to continue to explore those avenues. That's going to be really important. Building up those capital systems that you need to have to sustain yourself is going to be important for my organization, at least. To continue to try to grow into this thing. It's so hard on equipment and labor, and it's a tough job. If you're a food waste guy, you're kind of like overglorified garbage man at the end of the day, and it's a tough job. So going down the road and knowing what we know now, that most of the cost of everything is fuel and labor, right? So it's fuel and labor. Food waste is 90% water, maybe let's say 80% water. If you can dehydrate this food waste in a way, if you can find, places like here in Cadillac, I was just driving down here for a meeting yesterday, and I drove by CCI, I believe it's called, Cadillac Casting Company, and they're big steel place. They've got to have tons of residual heat that they're not using, that they can capture, and if there was like a dehydration system alongside that, if a company can come in there and partner up with them and say, hey, we're gonna take all of Cadillac's food waste and dump it into this, way to do this. Now you've got a stable product. It's not gonna have its odors. You're not gonna have to fight time on it going anaerobic. You're gonna take away a lot of those problems that society's not gonna let you put, not in my backyard attitude. If that stuff is getting turned into a stable product, they can go from there. It can be transported at a reasonable rate to a place where they can do, a methane capture from that material. I think the process, and this might not be in 5 years or 10 years, but I think when we get down the road here, it'll have to go towards a way to fix that logistics problem.
So when you talk about dewatering, that technology exists. There are dewatering machines that are sold into commercial food service that sit right alongside the dishwasher, and it is a tool. And that's maybe a mechanism that you can talk about with some of your larger customers, like the resorts. And basically what a dewatering machine is a mini compactor that pushes through a screen that pulls all that water out of that food waste and gives you a brick at the end of it.
Mm-hmm.
And so there is that technology, but it's expensive. I mean,
Yeah.
for an industrial kitchen to buy that technology, and I haven't looked at the numbers recently, but the last time I looked at it, you're $10,000 to $20,000 depending on the size of the equipment.
Is there a return on that investment eventually?
There absolutely is a return on that investment, but again, it's about the outlet on the backside. So you can have a dewatering system, but then you still have to compost that brick somewhere.
Right.
And so you, as a compost facility, then have to add liquid back into that. And so it's all about the mix again.
Mm-hmm.
But not to go way off tangent, I didn't know if you were aware of that technology or if you've ever looked at it, but
Yeah,
it's
I've seen it. Yep.
it's a rabbit hole to go down.
It's
Yeah.
expensive. We looked into that.
Yeah.
And, just for a commercial kitchen, I mean, you'd have to be a pretty well-run facility to be able to afford something like that.
Oh,
I mean,
absolutely.
Pretty large and pretty efficient system.
So, Lindsay, what is your answer to that question? To the
My quick answer to making Michigan a better food waste partner on the planet is, one, we do, in terms of commercial and public, composting operations, we really do need more regulation in the state of Michigan in terms of kind of unifying all of us, making sure our sites are being visited on a regular basis by the DEQ. We're hungry for regulation because we want to produce a product that can be used on a large scale statewide initiatives like with MDOT or our road commission. So having some kind of
Thank you for that. So we're going to kind of wrap this up here. It's fast approaching noon. I want to do a couple of plug outs. First of all, to the MRC for allowing us to have these regional outreach meetings and to connect with you folks more intimately. For the Cadillac CC Television Network for being able to stream this for us and to put it out there for us in the evergreen method. As we look at, going into the holiday season, we have that MRC Recycle Promoters program that's available out there. Shameless plug for the MRC on that. For those of you who are really interested in this topic of food waste, and if you haven't read it already, Jonathan Bloom makes a book called American Wasteland. It talks about this in great detail, and it's a good resource to really understand food waste in the U.S. Now, it's an 8-year-old book. There are other books out there. I'm not saying his is the best one. I'm just saying it's a good resource. The EPA has a food recovery hierarchy that you should always use as you talk about this throughout school systems and public education, and I think that's a great place to, help share that message as well. Before we wrap up, if there's anyone that's got anything in the audience that they want to say, I know Matt Flechter's here from DEQ. He's a huge compost nerd, and Sarah Archer's here, and she's a huge compost nerd. And there's some other folks in the audience that if you guys want to share anything about compost in Michigan, you're more than welcome to. If not, there's a beer with my name on it at Clam Lake Brewery that I'm waiting to get to. Oh, Sarah Archer is going to take me up on the offer.
I just want to, a lot of this is revolving around large-scale collection, and just remind everybody that really if we can just handle it at the source, go back to the reduced model, talk about handling it at home, through backyard composting, through vermicomposting, and just letting people make sure that that's part of our education, is that we teach people how to deal with that material at home, so we're not having to expend lots of dollars and run lots of trucks on our roads to handle that material, in a larger fashion. So that's all. But thanks for a great job. I really learned a lot from everybody.
I want to say something too.
Go ahead, Matt.
Yeah, really.
You have 2 hours.
45 minutes at the most.
I like what Lindsay just said about the words we use. I've been trying to change the way I talk about food waste and call it wasted food. It's the action. I think that puts in our minds that we can all do something about this. It's not something that is wasted or is waste. It's we're making an action and we're making a choice. So I would say that to all of us, think about those words that we use to say it's wasted food, not food waste. It's not a criticism. It's actually a really good compliment, because what you're doing here, Matt, thank you, Republic, to use your time to organize these things. Because I can see this as a continuum. If I look out into the future about where we're going to be with this, we can actually look back and see how things changed with other materials. And what ended up happening with our early recycling programs was we had innovators, activists, and communities building the recycling programs. And then the Republic said, hey, you're asking for this, community? I can make money off of that. You're telling me that I need to service your community in this way through a contract? I can do that. But what first has to happen is that community movement of people asking for it. So I see that happening with food waste. And so these types of forums where we got innovative ideas with Lindsay and others saying, we can do this, and then Republic saying, how am I going to scale this? That's how this is going to happen. So thank you all for putting this together.
Thank you, Matt.
No, thank you guys. So, and the last shameless plug, of course, is Republic. I mean, we sponsor these events, foot the bill for the CC Television Network to broadcast it, and we do it as a community partner here in Northern Michigan. Part of our One Blue Planet sustainability pledge is to make sure that the information that is desired by the community is shed, and I'm just happy to be part of it. So for those of you who are at home watching us, I'm sorry you're not going to have a beer with us at Clam Lake Brewery. For those of you who are here and are calling at the end of the day, enjoy a beverage. For those of you who are going back to work, enjoy lunch with us. But we thank you for coming, and we appreciate your time. And for Lindsay and Josh and Andy, we really appreciate you taking the time out of your day to be with us to talk about this topic today and to shed your light on it. We appreciate you very much.
Thanks, man.
Lindsay, thank you.
Bye,
Thank
Lindsay.
you, Matt. Sorry I won't be able to join you for lunch.
You can make it down here.
You can make it. You leave right now. Andy will wait for you. See ya.
Sure, it stops snowing.
Bye-bye.
She's really at the brewery.
She is at the brewery.